and we'll get going.
I'll do that, Bob, but first I want to stand up.
Ah, go
Because
show
I was
off.
hoping that would show up, but it didn't. I lied a little bit on this title because by 1894, Allegany College was really St. Bonaventure College. And, you know, there are a couple, let me share. Okay, can we see that?
There you go. Yeah, just go to full screen and you're ready to go.
Okay. Is that full screen there?
Got it. Looks good.
Okay, great. Well, as I mentioned, it really was St. Bonaventure College, and I did a little bit of research on the history of St. Bonaventure. This isn't that interesting, to tell you the truth. But I didn't see any reference to Allegany College, but it is in Charles Alexander's biography of John McGraw, so that's where I got this from. And you'll see a picture here, and you can see there is a reference to Allegany. So the reason that this is kind of interesting to me is when you look at this athletic field, it's a very nice ball field, but it's just a nice ball field. St. Bonaventure, my alma mater, class of 1973, was a basketball school. We only had about between 2,000 and 3,000 undergraduate students, but we had a powerhouse basketball team my freshman year. And I'm kind of embarrassed about this. We knew that this field was called McGraw-Jennings. And I've been racking my brains to remember if we knew the history of it, why the heck was it called McGraw-Jennings? I certainly knew who McGraw was. I just didn't make the connection. Jennings I had never heard of before. But as you'll see as we go along here, it was kind of an interesting coincidence that their paths would cross with mine eventually twice. Anyway, this is not Arizona State or USC or Vanderbilt or any big time college program. Baseball is Division I, Atlantic 10, just like the basketball program, but it was not a big deal. If you talk to anybody in my class, do you remember anything about the baseball team? Unless they're on the baseball team, they wouldn't tell you that. They would tell you about the basketball team. They would tell you about going down to the Rathskeller. Drinking age was 18 years in those days. But baseball was just kind of a cipher. So it was later on that I began to realize that there was this baseball connection. Now the Reilly Center is where the basketball court is. There's some offices there, bookstore and so forth, and a trophy case. Most of it's basketball. But if you can see that photo on the left, that's Hugh Jennings, and McGraw's on your right. It's hard to see them. But obviously they were very proud of this relationship between these two guys. And there's McGraw. And just a little background, you guys, anybody else I'd have to explain this. You guys know more about John McGraw than I do, I'm sure. But he was born in 1873, April 7th in Truxton, New York. I've got a little map that locates where that is and where Bonaventure is. And then he died in New Rochelle, February 25th, 1934. And that's where Truxton is. If you know where Route 81 is, Interstate 81, it goes from Syracuse down through Cortland and then to Binghamton and then Scranton. And Truxton is in Cortland County. That's what's in red here, just to the east of Cortland and 81, small town. Olean is here, Cattaraugus County, very close to the border with Pennsylvania. And I was planning on going to Truxton. I didn't do it, so I cheated a little bit. I did get this picture of John McGraw Field. I got to say, McGraw-Jennings is a little nicer than this one. And of course, there's a statue of John McGraw there. And this is a quote that I uttered a lot, I guess, whenever he was in a brawl, which must have been a lot of times. Truxton against the world. He named his dog Truxton. You know, I don't know exactly why, but it was easy to remember. Charles Alexander's biography is quite informative about the early days of McGraw's life. This is a quote from that source. John McGraw was one of the millions of youngsters who not only fantasized about playing baseball professionally, but practiced endlessly and played as often as they could in the hope that somehow some kind of opportunity would come along. And this was quite sad. In fact, John's father, there's just a reference here to Ellen and some of his brothers, but he already lost his first wife. So you have some sympathy for the guy, even though at the end of the paragraph points out he wasn't too nice to his son. I kind of understand it though. In the winter of 1884-85, a diphtheria epidemic would claim the lives of John Sr.'s wife, Ellen, and 4 of his McGraw children. I mean, 5 at once. And you can kind of understand him. You know, John's my son. He's going to take over family responsibilities. And guess what? As young John grew older, his father expected him to share the responsibility of raising his family, but his son had developed a passion for baseball his father could not abide. In the fall of 1885, after learning that his son had broken yet another of their neighbors' windows. It'd be interesting to do a survey of everyone here. How many other people have broken a window playing baseball? I have to admit, I did that one time. My father was pretty nice about it, though. Anyway, that was the straw that broke his father's back. He went into a rage and started beating up on John Jr. And then John just left the house. There was a place in Truxton called the Truxton House. Widow Mary Goddard ran the place, and she offered to take him in, and he would do chores at the Truxton House. I mean, the dad knew about it, and it was probably good that there was some separation between them. So here we are, John helped run the Truxton House, but this left time for, guess what, baseball. In 1889, he began playing ball for a local team managed by Bert Kenny. And around that time, Kenny bought into a new franchise that would be located in Olean. You can see the connection here. As a member of the Ninth Pen League, as we would call it in Buffalo. Upon hearing that Kenny was recruiting players, McGraw successfully lobbied incessantly. He probably let him do it just to shut him up for a contract in the 1890 season. And I love this picture. I just stumbled on it. First of all, you can see how young and skinny he looked, but the shirt says Olean. He was only there 1 year. So this got to be the only picture of him when he was on that team, 16, maybe he turned 17 years old. And obviously quite proud of the fact, hey, I'm on a ball team. But he was 16. So his tenure with the Olean Ball Club didn't go too well. He ended up going to a team in Wellsville, which is just to the east, I think about 40 miles from Olean. And then he went to some other clubs before he ended up in Baltimore and became John McGraw. But while he was still in Olean, he became friends with a young Franciscan faculty member. Yeah, I knew some of those guys when I was there. They were still there in 1969, 73, from nearby Allegany College. The Reverend Dolan served as the school's athletic director. One evening while having dinner together at the college, you got to give McGraw some credit here, don't you? Dolan spoke to McGraw about the advantages of a college education for a young man who may or may not have a future in professional sports. And he listened to him. 2 years later, McGraw thought that rather than to spend his offseason in Baltimore, he finally made it to the Orioles, or Truxton, he would offer Father Dolan and the college a proposal. And this is it. If the college would let him enroll, let him take some courses, waive his tuition, and provide him with room and board, he'd be willing to coach the college baseball team after the first of the new year. With consent from the Reverend Joseph Butler, that was the president of the college at the time, Dolan let McGraw know that, yeah, we'll let you do that. And by the fall of 1892, Allegany College was renamed St. Bonaventure College, later St. Bonaventure University. And had 2 classroom buildings. We've gotten a lot bigger since then, not too big. And later, Jennings would use for night practice. They go in the basement of Alumni Hall. And quote, I love this quote, don't see any irony here. I find wrestling with the books much harder than I find wrestling with the umpire. He did a lot more wrestling with umpires afterward. In fact, you guys were talking about baseball during this era. And when you read some of the accounts of what the umpires had to go through, it was unbelievable. Who would want that job? They would have to fight and argue with ball players, fans. They'd have fist fights after some games. And boy, you know, the abuse that they take today is nowhere near what it was then. Anyway, I found this letter when I went to the Freedsom Library at Bonaventure, and it was from Joseph Broderick, the manager of the Bonaventure baseball team. I think this was around 1945. He had written a letter to one of the Franciscans about McGraw. He described him as an earnest student, rated especially high in mathematics. This is kind of interesting too. John McGraw had no bad habits. Maybe we could add yet. So far as I know, he never smoked in his life. His word was his bond, and we all respected him for it. And I happened to find a picture of Alumni Hall. Obviously, wasn't around when I was there, but that's what it looked like for what it's worth. And this is the picture I mentioned earlier. You can tell here, I don't know exactly when this was. There's nobody in here. It's not Hugh or McGraw. But you can see the uniforms say St. Bonaventure and a couple say Allegany on it. So the second from the right, first row, and the last one on the first row both have Allegany on it. So this is some period of transition. Didn't want to throw away those old uniforms. They're still useful. And this is Hugh Jennings. Looks very dapper here. You know, he, as most ball players, grew up kind of poor. But he took classes at Bonas. He later on went to Cornell for law school. He didn't get a degree, but he did get his law license, and he practiced in Scranton. I'm guessing that was around that time. He looks a little bit older there, quite distinguished, quite different when he got, as opposed to when he got in an argument on the ball field. But as you can see here, he was born in 1869 in Piston, PA. Let me digress a little bit. After I graduated from Bona, we kicked around, got married, went to a couple different places, and then I ended up getting a job at the University of Scranton. Well, Scranton is right next to Pittston. I mean, talk about a coincidence. Again, when I first got there, I didn't know Hugh Jennings, but Jack Smiles, if anyone knows anything about Jack's biography called E.A. About Hugh Jennings, I got a lot of information from Jack. I did communicate with him too. He's a great guy. Anyway, he died in Scranton in 1928. This is another coincidence. I read more on this later, but I read a bio about him after he passed away, and they mentioned his address. And I said, wait a minute, Vine Street, that's one block over. His house isn't there anymore, but as you'll see, I took a couple pictures of where it used to be. There it is. It's the Regional Hospital Surgery Center. Never been there, but it's just a couple doors away from the Scranton Public Library. So that's where he used to live. And I'm not sure where his law office was, but it was in Scranton. And I thought I would visit his where he was buried in St. Catherine Cemetery in Moscow. If you look closely, there's a baseball on the ground. I did not put it there, but apparently every once in a while, a fan will come by and put a baseball or some bit of memorabilia in front of the gravesite. And not here, but I found another photograph of one of the baseballs, and it was said, "Ouch." And apparently this fan knew that Hugh Jennings set a record for the most times getting hit by pitcher. A lot of it was intentional when he was with the Orioles. But this guy had to be the most injury-prone professional baseball player in history. And I wanted to read this to you because in 1897, Amos Rusey, who could throw pretty hard, he was the Hoosier Thunderbolt from Indiana. One of his fastballs struck Hugh Jennings in the head, rendering him comatose for 4 days before recovery. Now, he had worse accidents than this. Rusey's wildness had been a catalyst for officials to change the distance from the pitching rubber to home plate from 50 feet to the current 60 feet, 6 inches, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, that's where Piston is. Now that is, the red area is Luzerne County. Luzerne County also is the home of Wilkes-Barre. And the county just above it is Lackawanna County, where Scranton is. Joe Biden, Pat Casey, senator. We're a real political hotbed these days. So again, that's pretty close. It's about midway between Scranton and Wilkes-Barre. By the way, also off 81. Hugh Jennings, boy, this is a common story, isn't it? You grow up, you don't want to go to work in the mines, you don't want to work farming, you don't want some tough jobs. Baseball sounds a lot better. And what do the parents always say? Hey, are you kidding me? That's a game. How are you going to make a living out of a game? So there's a lot of resistance. But all of these guys, not just these two, were very determined. I am going to play baseball. And this is from Jack Smile's book. I worked hard to make good because I had a goal set and wanted to realize an ambition. I worked to attain a certain end. That end was to be free of the mines once and for all. And he did work in the mines. I'm going to digress a little bit. And from Jack's bio, a little background on Hugh's family. He was the ninth child of James and Nora Jennings, Irish immigrants who came to Pittston in 1851. Now, this to me is pretty interesting. His father was one miner, he did work in the mines. He never went to a tavern. Look, my dad's family was Irish. He had a lot of brothers. They all drank. I mean, I'm not criticizing Irish people, okay? But he took a temperance pledge from his parish priest, and he never drank alcohol the rest of his life. Good for him. Before, Huey was a mule driver. He was a mule driver in the mines, and his father said, hey, yeah, I worked in the mines. You know, all my sons can do it too. What was good for them, good for me. Despite Huey's claim that mining has compensations, that's been kind of diplomatic. I'm not sure what those would be. He was determined to get out. As Huey worked his way up the mine job ladder, he was also starting up the baseball ladder. At 13, he's recruited by the Moosic Pounders. Moosic, very close to both Scranton and Pittston. When at age 15, he was promoted to assistant driver boss. Hey, his way is on his way up, I hope, outside the mine. At the number 13 shaft of the Pennsylvania Colliery, his father and mine foreman, could no longer abide his baseball. Hey, let's give this sport up with this game. When Huey asked to leave work early to play for the Pounders in a big rivalry game, his father and his mine boss said no. Huey went anyway. The story goes that his father forcibly stopped him, made him put on one of his sister's dresses, and said, if you go in this. And he did. Anyway, meandered around for some clubs, did some catching. You know, again, after a period of time, he ends up with Baltimore. And even though he would have been originally a third baseman, which would have been a rival of McGraw, they later moved him to shortstop. Anyway, they became really close friends. There's a lot of similarities between the two, the Irish background, the same attitude, competitive attitude that they had. And these close friends, by the time 1893, 94 came up, and again, the years might be a little bit different. I've seen different years from different sources, but this is from one horse's mouth. During the winter of 1893-94, McGraw had attended St. Bonaventure's College, and he arrived in camp in the spring of 1894, exceedingly enthusiastic. He kept preaching to me on the subject of the advantage of education. In other words, he's getting the same spiel that he had. And finally decided to join him. Good for him. We applied ourselves to our studies, and in February, we began to coach the baseball team. This continued until we had to leave for the spring training camp of the Baltimores. We both returned for 3 more years in 1898 and went back to St. Bonaventure again, but McGraw did not. The following February, 1899, he accepted a position as coach of the Cornell University team. There's a little postscript at the end. I sent many or two. I've got a story about Cornell as well. And this is a picture of the Bonner team. It's kind of funny if you see the kind of ghostly outlines of some of the players. But James Broderick, who wrote that letter I referred to earlier, the manager is in the middle, in the second row. And you can see on either end of the back row, Hugh Jennings and John McGraw looking very young. And I thought, well, I have this wonderful picture. I got this, I don't know, eBay or somewhere. And the year might be off a little bit, 1894, because Arley Pond is over there on the right. I don't think he was on the 84 team or 94 team. I might be wrong about that. But when you see some of these players, this may have been the greatest baseball team. I think Connie Mack said something like, "This is the best baseball team until the 27 Yankees." I believe there's 6 Hall of Famers here. Foxy Ned Hanlon, the manager, McGraw, Keeler, Jennings, Kate Gleason is there, not in the Hall of Fame. Of course, became famous for, you know what, 19, 20. And who else? Oh, Wilbur Robinson too. So 6 Hall of Famers on that one team. Some are present day managers. So I guess that was probably written in the 19th century, pretty sure. Okay, fast forward, you all know about Jennings, coach, managing the Detroit Tigers with Ty Cobb, a lot of other stuff. And McGraw, of course, would be probably still the most famous manager in baseball history. And he's getting near the end. By this time, Jennings was ill. He, as I noted earlier, he passed away in 1928. He developed tuberculosis, and I think meningitis is what finally killed him. He's a tough old bird. And they were going to dedicate what became, of course, McGraw-Jennings Field. And this is what McGraw said at the dedication. It would be an injustice to me, to the baseball world and the college, and what is most important to Huey. By the way, notice the spelling, and Jack mentioned this in his book. You see with a Y or IE. Basically, I'll take Jack's word on this since he's the expert. Huey would spell it IE. The most pleasant experiences of my life were in the company of my friend here on these same grounds where I was. How about that? Which you would dedicate in my name today in the absence of my chum and invalid, I consider it not only inappropriate, but unfitting to call this McGraw Field. I will not consent to it. Well, what do you think they said? No, go home. Yeah, sure. We'll call it McGraw-Jennings Field. And that same time, the dedication featured a baseball game. And of course, McGraw would bring his players there. And the guy on the right is a fellow named Rogers Hornsby. Perhaps you've heard of him. There was an editorial in the Wall Street Journal by Fay Vincent about a month ago, I think it was. It said, you know, the most unbreakable record in baseball was Hornsby's 5 years where he averaged 400. And I knew he was great here, of course. I said, no, he might have a point there. And this isn't about the dedication, but it's a little card that was sent to somebody who must have tossed some money at St. Bonaventure College until the date here, 1939. I thought I'd throw that in there because I found it. And then finally, when I went to Bonaventure, I'd mentioned the Freedom Library. Dennis Franks, who was the archivist there, was very helpful. And I found these school publications. Now, one of them, the St. Bonaventure Laurel, from the spring of 1950, had an article about the baseball team and McGraw-Jennings. During the years 1892-95, this might be off a little bit, McGraw spent his off seasons at St. Bonaventure, persuaded Hugh Jennings, i.e. Huey, to join them in 1893. The two attended school in the fall and winter, coached the college team as player managers in the spring, and played for the Orioles in the summer. Jennings was a student at St. Bonaventure from 1894. By the way, apparently he also sang there. Guy was a real Renaissance man. The same year, he became a Baltimore regular until 1897. After his death, Mrs. Jennings recalled Huey and I would have long talks about his career, and he always said that some of his happiest days, now remember, this is before the Rathskeller was there, so he must have really enjoyed camaraderie with the players and playing baseball, were spent there during his 3 years at Bonus. He loved athletics and people, and there, i.e. Bonus, he had a chance to enjoy both at their respective unsoiled best. And here's a picture of Brian Loda. I remember that name. He was before my time, but one of the presidents of the university, a couple ball players for Bonus, and then Grace McWilliams and Blanche McGraw. Grace, the niece of Hugh Jennings and McGraw's widow.
And I mentioned as a postscript, I mean, some of you may know this story, and I heard this when I said, you got to be kidding me. This guy had been drinking, and, you know, in fairness to Hugh Jennings, I haven't seen any evidence that he was, but how does this happen? Huey Jennings, coach of the Cornell baseball team. Now, this is 1904. And one of the best known baseball men in the country met with a very serious accident in the Cornell gymnasium today. Jennings dove into the swimming pool. Unfortunately, there was no water, and he struck with terrific force upon the bottom. The fall rendered him unconscious. He suffered severe injuries about the head, again with the head injury, although it's not thought that his skull had been fractured. Both wrists were so sprained or broken that it's doubtful whether the famous baseball player will ever again be any good at the national game. Well, mostly after that, I started with managing the Tigers in '06. But how about this one? I found this photograph. You can see the dates on it in the lower left-hand corner. Gouldsboro. Now that's in the Poconos. I tried to find the location of this. I couldn't do it, and I figured it was on a wild goose chase. And I asked Jack Smiles about it, and he said he wasn't sure exactly where it was. But this was called the Lehigh Creek. It's not the Lehigh River. And boy, doesn't it remind you of Chappaquiddick, except it's not as wide as because car goes over. It was after a wedding. Hugh was driving Father Lina. The Lina family, quite famous locally. They own a newspaper and very involved in the community. And apparently, you know, December, the weather wasn't so great. There was a married couple that he was driving home, and the car went off the bridge. Fortunately, two people, I don't think it's these two, not sure, but who lived nearby heard this. They came out and probably saved their lives, but he was hurt very severely. And it was thought that maybe this would be fatal. You know, the guy is a survivor. Anyway, those are just my references. And if I can say one more thing, you people have probably, some of you have probably gone to the Giamatti Center at the Hall of Fame and asked for some help for research. I did that, and they said, well, just give us a date when you might be here or will be here. And I did. And I told them what I was looking for, and I had this file of old articles about, I think it was just Jennings. I might have had some. I said, well, this is great. And after I was done, I was there all day. I said, well, do I have to pay? Well, you know, just the copy machine's over there. Give me 25 cents per copy. And it's unbelievable. It's such a wonderful source for research. Matt Rothenberg, manager of the Giamatti Research Center, was pretty wonderful that day. So that's all I got.
Thank you, Jack. We appreciate there's a couple of questions that have come through here and a couple of comments.
Sure.
Let's see, let me increase the chat size here. Justin McKinney put a link in the chat for a copy of the picture of that old lean team with John McGraw in it that was referenced, and Tom Schieber actually put a link in there also that you can click on to see that
Yeah, great.
photo in his Olean uniform, and he dates it to 1890. And
I got it. Thank you.
Tom thought he was catching everybody, and he trailed Justin. Justin was the winner of that race. The Baltimore photo, Craig Brown notes, is the 1895 team with Arley Pond in it. And Mike Pike talks of the car accident photos from a postcard that was widely distributed, a copy of which he has in his collection, and a bunch of compliments on your presentation. Thank you very much. If there's anything else to add here.
Well, I'd like to say one thing. The first SABR meeting I went to was in Boston. Some of you may have been there, 2002 maybe. The panel discussion on the luncheon was about Ted Williams, and Ted passed away a couple days afterward. Johnny Pesky was there, Dom DiMaggio, and somebody received a reward, and what he said really stuck in my mind. Rookie of the year, research, whatever it was. And he said, where I live right now, I'm the expert. I can tell people something about baseball. Oh, wow, that's great. And I said, I come here and I feel like a complete amateur. The amazing thing about events like this is people are so knowledgeable about this stuff. And kind of makes sense, this is about 19th century baseball, but it's pretty amazing when you see the people who are here in SABR meetings, their love for this game, and it's really fun to interact with you. So thanks,
Well,
it was great.
Thank you, Ed. We appreciate the work and the presentation. Very, very interesting. Very well done. Peter, would you like to take here?
Yes, just Ed, just one thing. I know that Tom Schreiber and Craig Brown both said that Orioles photograph is from 1895.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I think Pond was the tip-off on that.
I think you're right. I think you were right. Thank you very much. That was very interesting.